Are you looking for ways to strengthen your marriage? Would you like to raise children you enjoy being around? Do you long for a peaceful, orderly home that's a blessing to everyone who comes through its doors? Then you've come to the right place. I'm Jennifer Flanders, a Bible-believing, homeschooling mother to 12 and host of the Loving Life at Home podcast. Join me as we discover what God's Word has to say about marriage, motherhood, and minding the things that matter most. Hello, friend. Welcome to episode 77 of Loving Life at Home. This week, I'd like to address some questions that have come in about timing on these big life decisions that all of us make, on when to get married, when to start a family, that sort of thing. I received a message this week from a mom who writes, I was intrigued by the mention of your husband and his residency as our youngest son is studying to take the MCAT in May. He's wondering how marriage and family work with medical school. Do you address that in any of your posts, or could you share any tips on lessons learned? Well, the only post that came to mind was one that I wrote 17 years ago in response to another very specific question about medical training. Only that one didn't come from the mom, it came from a wife. And she wrote, I would love to seek your wisdom on a particular subject. My husband is a first-year medical student, and we're considering having children while he's in med school. We would deeply value any advice that you have time to share. Well, my answer to her and my answer to this mom is that we're happy to share our perspective on having babies during medical school. We had 3 when my husband was in school, 2 more plus pregnant with number 6 while we were in residency, and then we went on to have 6 more once he started his practice. Was it ever a struggle? Yes, at times, especially financially, since Doug was committed from the beginning for me to stay at home and homeschool our kids, and having them early meant that we just had to take out bigger loans while he was in school. Would we do it all over again? Absolutely we would. We are profoundly grateful that God overruled our half-hearted attempt to use natural family planning to postpone pregnancy until after he completed his training, a plan that was quickly abandoned when I got pregnant 2 weeks into our honeymoon. In fact, our first son was born on May 31st, and Doug began doing research at the medical school during a summer position June 1st, the very next day. And we have such great memories of pulling together through medical school, of working together. Even the hard times make good memories when they're over. It's kind of like combat soldiers that bond during war. When you go through thick and thin together, it forges a link that is not easily destroyed. I think what you really need is a commitment to marriage in general and to one another in specific, undergirded by a faith in God and in his design for marriage, and that cord of 3 strands, as it talks about in the book of Ecclesiastes, is not quickly broken. It's not easily broken. And we had babies during his clinical years when he was on every other night call, and I wasn't even sure if they would let him off to come to the hospital and observe the birth. We survived him working 110 hours a week through his internship year, which was really tough, but we came out even stronger on the other side of it. We packed up our kids and took them with us during his medical reserve deployments and squeezed 12 people into a tiny 500 square foot apartment in the bachelor barracks to be able to stay together. Some of those things are our very favorite memories together, and they were really a struggle at the time. But the problem with waiting for the perfect time to have a baby or to get married or any other big life decision is that it becomes easier and easier to find reasons to postpone. We'll just wait until I graduate or finish residency or get established or build a house. You understand, those excuses pile up. And it also gets harder and harder to conceive once the perfect time arrives. That's because a woman has just a small window of fertile years, a window that begins to close in her 20s. By 30, she has only a 20% chance of getting pregnant each month, and by 40, it drops to 5%. I do think there's a difference between a woman who's never had the opportunity to have children because she wasn't married until she was in her late 30s or early 40s, and somebody that has purposefully delayed for, a decade or more through use of hormonal contraceptives before she ever attempted to have children. Those hormones can really wreak havoc with your system and make it more difficult to get pregnant when you think you really are finally ready to have a family. So postponing indefinitely is not really a good strategy for women who are already married and do eventually want children. So I would say go for it. There are a lot of benefits to starting early and having babies while you're young. First, you have more energy. Younger moms have an easier time keeping up with active toddlers. Raising children is hard work, and it's best to get started while your energy levels are still pretty high. Now, we had 12, and my first was born early 20s, and my last was born at 45, or the day before I turned 45. And God is gracious throughout, and He obviously provides for all our needs and gave me the energy to continue to parent my children even in my 40s and 50s. I'll be 60 in April, and we're still at it. We still have kids at home. But my energy level isn't as high now as it was when I was younger, and so I'm glad that when I was the only one chasing toddlers that I was pretty young when that job was fully mine because my husband was away for so much of the time in his training. Another benefit is better health. Starting your family early is good for your health. Mothers who give birth at a young age have a lower incidence of breast and ovarian cancer. Now, we see how that played out in my life. I did get a breast cancer diagnosis just the end of last year, despite having a lot of children and starting early. So that's no guarantee, but generally it does lower your incidence of both those cancers. And it shows that men who father children live longer, especially if they begin when they're still young. Then also it can lead to a stronger marriage. Having children is good for your marriage. It matures you both in more ways than you can imagine. It cements your love and seals your commitment to one another. Watching my husband interact with my children has given me a whole new respect for him by bringing to light character qualities which otherwise would have remained unrecognized and unappreciated. Then it also entails a clear commitment. With divorce rates topping 50% in the general population and even higher among certain medical specialties, it's interesting to note that your risk of divorce goes down with each child, and it also is reduced by a greater delay in that empty nest. That wedding ring on your husband's finger might not keep the cute little nurses from flirting with him, but 2 or 3 or 11 or 12 baby pictures in his wallet sure slow them down. Then it's also a stress reducer. Although conventional wisdom may tell you that medical school is hard enough without throwing dirty diapers and midnight feedings into the mix, Doug and I found that making babies was a great stress reliever for him, and nursing them was a terrific stress reliever for me. And of course, we shouldn't forget the most obvious reason for starting a family ASAP. Babies are wonderful, and so are toddlers and adolescents and teens and adult children and grandchildren. God really knew what He was talking about when He declared children are a blessing from the Lord. Happy is the man whose quiver is full of them. Out of Psalm 127. That was a post that I wrote 17 years ago, but I haven't changed my mind at all since that time. If anything, I'm more thankful and more firmly convinced than ever that this was absolutely the best course for us. While that post was specifically about having babies during medical school, the same arguments could be made for marrying early in your schooling rather than later. Provided you find an understanding and supportive spouse to marry, I'd say go for it. My husband always maintained that he had much more time to study during school than his single friends because they spent so much time going to parties and bar hopping and trying to find girlfriends that they were totally distracted on the primary purpose of their being in that training to start with. Doug, on the other hand, had me waiting at home for him at the end of every long day, whether he was in class or clinicals, and he could get right down to business, both in terms of study and of sharing intimacy without having to jump through a lot of extra hoops. Life was great back then, and it's continued to be great. And God has been so faithful from the beginning to provide for all our needs. Our need for strength and stamina and energy and wisdom and sustenance, everything. Plus, all that pulling together we did during the lean years of living on school loans and shopping garage sales and finding frugal fun bonded us together in ways that probably would not have been possible had we waited until after his training to marry or to start a family. That goal of being comfortable before you ever make any kind of commitment really robs people of a lot of joy that they would experience in the journey. So think it through. What kind of big decisions are you putting off until the perfect time? And how disappointed are you going to be if the perfect time never arises? Is there something you can do today to get started working towards those goals? Even if the timing doesn't seem perfect, pray about it and be willing to take that leap of faith if the Lord prompts you to do so. Thanks so much for listening today. If you have a question you'd like to hear covered on this podcast, message me on Instagram at Flanders_family or contact me through my website, lovinglifeathome.com. Before you go, if you've been encouraged by something you've heard on the show, do me a favor and forward the link to a friend or head over to Loving Life at Home on Apple iTunes to subscribe and leave a written review of the show. Your doing so will help others find me so they can listen too. Until next time, I pray the Lord will bless your efforts to build a loving home life centered on Him.